Okay. Am I audible now? No. Oh, awesome. Great. Thank God. Okay. All right. So we'll begin with today's session. So last time in our previous session, we had talked about and discussed deeply about the origination of yoga, why yoga came into existence, and what we can understand, what can be the sources from which this entire process and you can say school or system was derived. Okay. And today we are going to understand the history and development of yoga. And I will tell you why this is important. So these few topics in the beginning, they might seem as if, it's just not very relevant. But in fact, these are very, very relevant topics, right? So initially to a beginner, they might seem a little bit like a very not very interesting topics, but history and development especially, right, will lead you to the changing of the intention for your practice. Okay, because you will understand why this practice was developed, right? And you can also trace back how it was practiced, and it can also provide you a route to understand why yoga is practiced in the way it is today. Okay, so whenever you study the history and development of something, you see that same thing change with time and adjusting to the needs of the people at that time, right? So today yoga is practiced in a certain way, and it is adjusting to the requirements of the modern society, right? But what it originally came up for, right, and how it was practiced in ancient times will help you to eventually nudge your practice towards that, right? So let's begin with the timelines. Okay, so the timelines I will provide you, they are generally agreed timelines, right, by historians, right? You can find some up and down when you do your own research, and it's nothing to get worried about, right? Overall, the breakdown of the time period is like this one, right? So a very important text in the beginning of the classes also I have emphasized, there is a very important text called the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, right? And Patanjali Yoga Sutra, or very shortly also known as the Yoga Sutra, right? Yoga Sutras in English, right? So they were the systematization, right? So all before everything was existing, but it was not systematized. And during this time period, yoga as a school was systematized. Okay, so before that period, that time period is called pre-classical period, right? Pre-classical period in the history of yoga, right? So before the systematization, there was still the existence of yoga. So you need to understand this thing, that yoga has always existed, it is still existing, and it will always exist, right? It is just one form, right, and one philosophy, one way of understanding how you can free yourself, right? So these practices have existed long before we were here, and they will exist long after we would have been gone. So this time period is pre-classical time period, is generally um, said to have existed till the 500 BC. Okay, 500 BC. So till that time period, the school of yoga, it wasn't systematized. So everything was basically scattered. Okay, so in the beginning, also in first lecture only, I told you about the Vedas, Vedas, Vedas. So these are our basic or base foundational scriptures, okay, which gave rise to all the schools of like the schools of the Indian philosophy, right? So these form the base. So these scriptures, right, all of the knowledge of yoga, right, like asana, practice of pranayama, meditation, all of these were present in the Vedas, okay, these scriptures, but they were scattered here and there. So there are total 4 Vedas and they are very, very elaborate, they are very, very long. So all of this information was existing, but again in a very, very scattered form. Okay. So when this information was existing in a scattered form, of course, the understanding of the processes was there, but how you have to go about them, it was not that easy to understand. And in fact, in the Vedas, there is no direct definition of yoga that is given, right? So when I gave you the definition also, I referred to other texts, right? So there is no proper direct definition also given, but these form the roots, the basis. So earlier the Vedas were studied, they were understood, and Vedas were also hard to understand, right? So in this time period, Vedas and then all the Vedas, their essence was captured in other texts. They were famously known as Upanishads. So this is not very relevant, right? Some names that I will take, they're not very, very relevant. But yes, if you know about them, it's okay, right? So the Upanishads, they captured the essence of the Vedas. Then people started to, study those because Vedas, sorry, the Upanishads, they were in story form, right? So when I also tell you stories, or when you learn about something through stories, the narration of stories, it sticks. And it was mostly in conversation, right? Upanishads are in conversation form. So when two people are talking, interacting, again, you tend to remember the information more easily, right? So from Vedas, the essence was derived, Upanishads came in, right? And then from here on, there were 2 epics also in this time period, which got very, very famous, right? One of them we will be studying a little bit about. So one was called the Mahabharata, right? And one was called the Ramayana, right? So again, names are not very, very important. It's just the understanding how people at that time were understanding yoga, right? We just need to get a glimpse into that. So Mahabharata, one portion of Mahabharata is Bhagavad-Gita, which we will have a separate class on, where again, once again, I will elaborate more on what Mahabharata actually is, right? What Bhagavad Gita actually is, right? So I will be talking on this scripture separately as well. And then we have another epic, which is the Ramayana, right? So basically, both of them are stories where, you understand how to deal with life, right? How you can navigate through life, right? It is you know showing the example where the situations weren't easy, right? But the action that had to be taken, it had to be taken, right? So setting the ideal example, setting the example of especially the rules and regulations, right? So how you interact with society, what is the right way of interaction with your own self. This was elaborated upon in these epics to a great extent, right? So they formed a very major portion of people understanding how to imbibe yoga in their day-to-day life, right? In the kinds of decisions they make, how they make their decisions, how they act. And finally, in this time as well, the 2 schools which became very, very famous, right, and which were practiced initially by people in the Indian subcontinent and then eventually it spread even outside. They were the schools of Buddhism and Jainism. Okay, Buddhism and Jainism. So Buddhism is very, very famous. I think at least you would have heard this term one time in your life, right? If you have been to some place where Buddhism is practiced, maybe you would have even practiced that. So Buddhism is more prevalent than Jainism, right? So these two again philosophies, you can say, they started to prevail a lot, right? The teachings of Buddha especially gained a lot of light, and a lot of people, in his time, they came under his, guidance, and they were able to walk on the path of yoga, right? So before the systematization, everything was going on in this manner only. From one source or the other source, there were some parts that you could get from one source, other parts you could get from another source. So this is how the whole knowledge was transmitted. And again, uh, in ancient times, of course, the information was also transmitted by word of mouth from one generation to the other, right? So this is how it was being practiced in whatever capacity you could be practiced, right? Then we come to a very major shift in the history of yoga, right? This was a very major turning point, because at this point of time, there was a very great sage, Maharishi Patanjali, right? He came in and he, systematized yoga. Okay. So his time period when he existed or is believed to have existed, that time period is actually called the classical period, right? So on the basis of the classical period only, we either divided into pre-classical or post-classical, right? So you need to observe this thing during the pre-classical period also. A lot of meditative practices. Meditation was a very, very major and substantial practice that was done by the people, right? And then as we even move to the classical period, right? When we talk of the classical period, we are talking of the timeline around 500 BC to 800 AD, right? This timeline is considered to be the time when yoga got systematized. So at this point of time, when Maharishi Patanjali he came in, he picked up the specific things which could uh, you know uh, give you a path how to walk on the path of yoga, right? Now, suppose my body is constantly moving, right? I'm not able to sit stably. So it becomes very difficult for me to practice meditation, right? If my body is constantly moving, then how will I do the meditation, right? I have to focus on something, right? First, develop my concentration on that thing, and then it converts into meditation. So when this thing was seen that I could not practice meditation first and then practice asana, right? I had to gain the stability in my body through the practice of asana first, and then I can move to an advanced practice like meditation, right? So this kind of systematization. So now the information was not scattered anymore, and he gave a very precise text. So he gave a very, very short text, and in that only he gave the step by step process, right? Like maybe some place which is not developed earlier, you just have to walk up just like that, right? And then eventually the construction takes place, and then there are stairs in that area, right? So what Patanjali did, he created these steps, these stairs. Taking one step at a time, you reach the final point, right? So he systematized yoga altogether, and he gave a proper, from the beginning till the end, with proper order, how you have to walk on the path, right? So this became a very, very big major turning point. Why? Because earlier people were still experimenting, earlier people were still understanding how yoga can be practiced, and of course they were also able to reach the final goal of yoga. But then again, there was a lack of understanding of the system, right? So at this point of time, this text came in, and this is also a very important text of Raj Yoga, right? So we will have a separate class on Raj Yoga as well. So you don't need to worry. I will explain everything in that class what Raj Yoga is. But basically speaking, again, meditation remained a very, very substantial part of the practice of yoga, right? So till the time of Patanjali, right, till 800 AD, the practices of Raj Yoga were very, very prevalent, right? And Raj Yoga, meditation doesn't have to do with anything with the physical world around you. You are trying to observe a very subtle reality. Okay. After the time of Patanjali, now what started happening was the environment was changing, right? Everything, you know, everything around us was changing, right? Like it is today as well, right? So if you watch the pollution levels 10 years back, they would be totally different. Today, the scenario is totally different. So constantly the environment, the air, the water, food quality, everything, has an impact on you, right? So like that, in that time period, the environment was very conducive for meditation. Okay. When the pre-classical and classical period, these were going on, it was very, very conducive for practices like meditation. Even the system of the society, it supported the meditative practices. The kids used to, go and live with the teacher for years and years. Okay. And this was seen as a priority, more of a priority than today. We are very career oriented, we want secure jobs, and we are very career driven, right? So our entire society is functioning on this basis only, that we get educated in the right way so that we can earn a living for ourselves, right? But earlier the system of the society was also very different. So now coming to the from the pre-classical to the classical period to the post-classical period. So the timeline after your 800 AD, that is called the post-classical period, and this goes on till 1700, right? So 1700 is not that far off. If you are thinking of thousands and thousands years back, then 1700 still seems a timeline which is more like close to our current existence. So from the 800 AD till 1700s, this time period is called the post-classical time period. Now, in this time period, like I said, the environment was already changing a lot. So practices, now people started shifting, all right? So now the focus shifted on the physical, right? In the sense, movement of the body. So you will see in the post-classical period, right? Tantra Yoga. Tantra is like a form of yoga, which is, basically uh, a way through the body only, right, into the deeper states, right? So Tantra Yoga, Hatha Yoga, the variation of which you are practicing in your asana class every day, Vinyasa flow, Ashtanga flow. These are all variations of Hatha flow, right? So this was the time when the Hatha yogic practices, the Tantra Yoga practices, these all developed a lot and gained a lot of life, right? At this point of time, even Bhakti Yoga gained a lot of light. Bhakti Yoga is, again, we are going to have a separate class on it, but it's mainly the devotion, when you devote yourself to a particular god, right? So these practices, they started gaining more and more momentum, right? So now people were highly focused on doing the asana practices, trying to keep their body healthy, right? Doing pranayama, wanting to have more like, sustainable way of even breathing, or how the breath regulation can take place, right? And other hatha yoga practices also, shatkarma, which is cleansing, right? So when the cleansing of the body has to take place, right, then you practice asana, then you practice pranayam, right? So hatha yoga specifically I will focus on in this time period. Why? Because you are currently also doing some practices of hatha yoga, right? When you attend your pranayam class, when you attend your asana class, and these are hatha yoga practices. So hatha yoga, by this time as well, because the society has had changed so drastically, right? Following certain sets of rules and regulations first became difficult for us, right? So suppose I'm asked to eat only sattvic food, right? Very common example, right? So I'm asked to eat only sattvic food when I'm doing my yogic practices, right? So now one day I have immense amount of craving, and I end up eating junk food. Okay. And I'm not supposed to eat that, right? So what started happening in people was, first thing, they were not able to stick to the rules and regulations, which earlier acted as a prerequisite for you to even practice. Okay. Second thing that was happening, when they were unable to stick, they were also unable to let go of this incapability, right? So there was a lot of guilt that was generated. And if you take your own example, if you miss your 1 day practice, right, you end up feeling guilty about it, and guilt is your biggest enemy, right? Why? Because once you start feeling guilty, that 1 day gets converted into 5 days, 8 days, 1 month, you don't know. Then you lose track unless and until you are unable to pull yourself out of this emotion, right? So be careful of guilt, right? So in this point, at this point of time, people, because they were unable to stick to the rules and regulations, they started feeling very guilty, which hampered with their practice. So what specifically Hatha Yoga did was, it removed these rules and regulations, right? And it said that a certain amount of willpower needs to be developed before these rules and regulations can be adopted, right? So now suppose you have been practicing yoga for some time. So now your willpower will be more, no? When you go out the next time, suppose somebody orders something you used to like a lot, but it was not good for your health. So when you sit outside now, you have more willpower. You can say that, no, I don't want to eat this, right? Before, maybe when you were just beginning your practices, what would have happened? You would have gone out and you would have eaten that food item, right? So slowly, as you develop your practice, your will also develops, right? To avoid the necessary things, right? To maintain your discipline. Even maintaining the discipline and practice is very hard to do, right? These days. So at that point of time, also this thing was going on. So the rules and regulations, they got pushed ahead. First, the focus was thrown on the cleansing of the body, because already everything around was overall generating more toxins in the body. Okay? Cleansing of the body, practice of asana, so that the physical body can remain healthy, right? Otherwise, disease also started coming up, right? Then also working on the pranayam practices, working on other hatha yogic practices like mudras, right? So these all things, they got more hold in that during that time, because rules and regulations were very hard to stick, right? So main focus came on the physical world, on the physical body, right? Now slowly we come to the timeline of 1700 to 1900, right? So now this comes very close to our own time of existence, right? 1700 to 1900. Again, there was good shift in the environment, right? So modern period, this is also called, this timeline 1700 to 1900, this is called the modern time period. Okay. So this time period, right, over here now, the modern yogis started coming in. So these yogis, they're not that far off when you look at the time, right? So um, yogis like Swami Vivekanand, right, or even Sri Aurobindo. So these people came in, and they again, introduced the idea of Raj Yoga, right? Raj Yoga is again focused on the meditative practices, right? So if you look at Swami Vivekanand, he went around the world. So earlier, yoga was mostly restricted to Indian subcontinent only, right? But now, with the modern yogis coming in, two things started to happen. One, Raj yogic practices were again thrown light upon, right? The meditative form. And then second thing, now yoga spread throughout the world, right? So the modern yogis, especially if you Google search Swami Vivekanand, he went to a lot of places, and he had conferences. He had conducted conferences, and people of the West, they got to know about the various practices of yoga. That is when even in the Western world, yoga started picking up as a practice, right? Because the entire idea was very fascinating, first thing. And second thing, of course, it was very freeing in its approach, right? it was not a restrictive kind of idea. Yoga is never restrictive. It will always free you, right? Your suffering will get less only if you go into the practices, right? So now what started happening? Yoga started seeing this another turning point in the journey of yoga, right? Where this revolution kind of thing happened. Yoga spread greatly to the outside world, and people of the West, they were more open as well, right? To take this information in. Okay. So at this point of time, various schools of yoga, so not only Raj Yoga, other schools of yoga were also, you know, uh, the main focus was to push the practices of yoga ahead, right? So other schools like Karma Yoga, so Swami Vivekanand, he has talked on all the four major schools of yoga. He has talked of the school of action. He has talked about the school of devotion, right? The school of wisdom, and then the school of this, the highest path, which I was saying, Raj Yoga, right? So this is the school of the working with the mind, right? The understanding of the mind, that is the main focus, right? So these started to gain again momentum, right? And after that, like in this timeline, when the propagation of yoga started to happen so much, it led us eventually into the contemporary period. From 1900s, the timeline of yoga is considered to be the contemporary period. Okay, so we have discussed, I will elaborate more on contemporary period, but so far we have discussed the pre-classical period, which is before 500 BC, right? Then the classical period, which is from 500 BC to 800 AD. Then the post-classical period, which is from 800 AD till the 1700s. The modern period, which is the fourth division, that is from 1700 to 1900s, right? And then after the 1900s, the um, you know time of the contemporary period started, right? So now the names I will take, most likely you would have heard of these names. So now yogis like Patabai Jois, BKS Iyengar, right? So you practice a lot of these practices only, right? T. Krishnamacharya. So Patabai Jois, he gave your Ashtanga flow, right? T. Krishnamacharya, he gave the Vinyasa flow that you guys practice in your classes, right? And then your BKS Iyengar, he has greatly contributed to a very major variation in the yogic practices, which are being adopted by a lot of people today, right? Then, teachers like Osho, teachers like Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, Sadhguru, S.N. Goenkaji, right? So what these people did was, now coming to the contemporary times, you know what kind of environment we are around, right? You know what is the quality of the water you are consuming, the quality of the food that you are consuming, right? All of this, has an impact on your body, right? Whatever I eat, it has an impact on the body. The kind of water I drink, again, it has an impact on my body, my mind, right? And of course, my flexibility levels, everything is impacted by these things, right? So modern yogis, they approached yoga in a way that it could serve, these contemporary people, they, you know, um, approached yoga in a way that we could embrace it, right? In pre-classical period, it was more about how it's implemented in life. But today, you take out time separately to come on your mat and do the asana practice, right? So now it is a part of your life, but it's not becoming a part of how you do each and everything, right? You separately take out time on the mat to, just have a more proper routine overall, right? So now in contemporary times, yoga is seen in two forms. One, where only the physical aspect and the very surface level physical aspect. So these days, asanas have the main light, okay, asana practice. And second thing, therapy form of yoga. right? So sometimes, students have these questions. They ask that, we have heard that yoga cannot be practiced unless and until you are ready to a certain level, right? Which is true. But then it is also true from the perspective of Raj Yoga, right? But Hatha Yoga, most of the people are practicing today, right? Then variations in Hatha Yoga that have come, like your Ashtanga, your Vinyas flow, right? So these were majorly developed for Western people only, right? Because in India we have an environment, or the climate is such that we sweat very easily, right? So Hatha yogic practices, you will see they are not that dynamic, right? They are more about going into the asana and just holding. But in Western, like if especially if you live, in US, Canada, these areas, right? These areas they require more movement for the same amount of sweating, right? Sweating. So sweating is a very big toxin of the body which needs to get released, so that, and the more you sweat, the better your flexibility gets because toxins are getting released. So Pattabhi Jois, P. Krishnamacharya, they taught outside a lot, right? To outside people a lot. And for them, this kind of movement was very, very important, right? Too much movement basically. So that sweat could be generated because they are living in temperatures which are very, like, very cold temperature, right? So it takes a while. For us, if we just practice Hatha Yoga, we just move our body slightly, right? We start sweating over here, right? So even our winters are not as harsh as the winters that are seen outside, right? So these styles were majorly developed keeping in mind the kind of area you are existing in, right? So now the practices also became more area specific, more purpose specific. So Ashtanga, Vinyasa, these, they will keep your body very, very healthy. In fact, right? If you are able to do the primary series, if you are able to do the Vinyasa flow, means your body is quite, good, right? Doing good it's good, it's in good shape, right? So Ashtanga and Vinyasa, then Osho has given so many practices related to meditation, related to all the other things as well. If we see Sadhguru, so he has given so many, and like Hatha Yogic, his even the physical movement practices are there. They are very different. He has come up with his own style, right? And then if you look at Shri Ravi Shankar also, he has also come up with his own style. So Art of Living, if you have heard of that. So he has also changed the practices, the traditional practices only. He has added some things, subtracted certain things, or changed the way of practice in certain ways, right? If you look at all of these modern gurus in general, right? So they have molded the practices in such a way that we can imbibe them, right? We meaning the common healthy person, right? But in the most current times, you can see yoga is used as a therapy, right? Most of the people, they are ill. All the asana practices that are given, right? Most of the people cannot do those. So when you practice over here in the classes, right, you would want to achieve maybe headstand, handstand, you will work towards it. But you are working towards it because you're students of you, right? But when you teach your students, you will see so many people come to you, come with like so many conditions that they already have, right? And if you are able to do the forward fold, they will not even be able to reach half of the forward fold, right? That is how much, in disease their body has gone, right? So these practices, again, they are good for you. But then again, you need to understand how you can give it to the other person also, right? So when you become teachers, right? So this thing should be on your mind, how you will pass on the practice, right? So yoga came as a form of therapy because we are struggling a lot with our health, especially with COVID coming in. A lot of people, they got a very good wake up call that now they need to, start working on their health. And second thing, for diseases, yoga is seen as a uh, holistic approach, right? So I'm not saying leave your allopathy medicines if you're currently going through some condition. But yes, if you start the practice of yoga, right, with variations, with the suitable variations, you will see that the allopathy that you are taking, that dose will begin to reduce, right? And this is not something I'm saying. This is actually happening. People who have adopted yoga into their daily lives, they have seen that their, medicines have gone down, their overall well-being has gone up, right? So currently the most important form of yoga is actually therapy, because people are looking to come back to the normal health right now in today's world. So the meditative practices, all of these, they are very far off for us. Why? Because currently we are just struggling with our physical health only, or maybe just our mental health only, right? So meditation is very, very far off, right? In its purest form, it is far off, right? So I am not saying you cannot practice meditation today, but it is quite a journey. You will take your time to reach there, right? So now where we are currently, where yoga is being used as a therapy, now we slowly, this will help you to change your intention, right? So slowly you will move towards a healthy body. Once you establish a healthy body, a healthy mind, right, then you can slowly move towards the original practices, which are mostly concerned with meditation only, right? So you will not see ancient yogis, standing on the head or standing on the hand, right? You will see them just sitting, right, with closed eyes and doing meditation, right? Because that is what you are moving towards, right? In meditation, again, it's an advanced practice, right? So eventually this entire class basically is aimed to just put this to the light, right? That yoga is not merely asanas, right? So don't get stuck in asana practice, that I'm not able to achieve full split, I'm not able to achieve headstand, handstand, so I have to do it, right? The entire world is going on in this madness only, right? So they forget that asana is just a stepping stone. Rather, rather they think that is the whole practice of yoga, right? So for you, this understanding is important so that you can make asana practice a stepping stone, so that the stability of the body, the health of the body is there, so that you can sit for meditation, so that you can sit for concentration, right? Sit for these practices. You're preparing for them when you do all of these practices. So this is your overall history and development of yoga through the ages, right, through the time periods as they changed. Any questions, doubts, or queries? Any difficulties in understanding why we are currently practicing yoga the way we are? Any difficulties?
Hello.
Hello? Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Vinasya and Ashtanga both are same, no? Style are.
Mm-hmm.
Vinasya and Ashtanga style are
Yes,
same.
yes. No. Vinyasa is different. Ashtanga is different. Both of them were
But
given.
the flow is flow of the same, no?
No.
When we do the asana, that time.
See, Ashtanga is fixed flow. It is given in a series only, and you practice in that series only. Vinyasa, you can change according to your understanding. So you can place one asana after the other if it is fitting certain, like it's fulfilling certain conditions. But Ashtanga series has been given in a particular way, and you have to practice it in that way only, right? So after maybe your triangle pose, you go for the revolved triangle pose only, right? You cannot go for uh, extended side angle pose. So it is given in a particular series and you have to follow that only. So sun salutation B cannot come before sun salutation A. First you have to do sun salutation A these many number of times, then you go to sun salutation B these many number of times, then you begin the asana practice and you go about it in a series.
And Hatha yoga,
Mhm.
Hatha yoga means just like a pressure of the body, bones and muscles. No?
Hatha yoga means, sorry?
Hatha yoga means pressure on your muscles and bones. Type of style of yoga.
Okay. So Hatha Yoga, we will have a separate class on it where I will deeply explain the concept of Hatha Yoga and the various practices, right? So asana practice is only a part of Hatha Yoga, right? The one that you are talking about where there is pressure, right? It's more about it's a more limited kind of practice, Hatha Yoga. Like in the future we will have one class on Hatha Yoga, so just attend that and see if you find the answer to this,
Yes.
right?
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So we will close today's session. We'll just chant Om followed by the Shanti Mantra. So just sit comfortably, gently close your eyes. Take a deep inhalation for Om. Om. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah. Sarve santu nirat. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschit dukhabhag bhavet. Ma kaschit dukhabhag bhavet. With a deep breath in, Om. Om. Shanti. 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 Feel the vibrations. Join your palms together and gently bow down. Begin to rub your palms together. Come on your eyes. Very slowly, while blinking and looking at your palms. Open up your eyes, coming back with a big smile on your face. Om Shanti. I will see you for pranayam class in the afternoon. Take care,
Yes.
guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.